Japanese have attacked Pearl Harbor by air.
Ask not what your country can do.
President Kennedy has been shot.
One small step for man.
These truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Interesting. Oh, hello. Well, I didn't see you there. I'm sorry. I was inspecting the binding of my books. Where are my manners? Good evening, and welcome to the Library of Knowledge. Tonight, in our very interesting segment, we shall be covering the major events and dates that have shaped American history. In the 3 centuries of its existence, there has been major wars, legislative actions, and scientific achievements that have completely reshaped the country. In this segment, we shall be exploring perhaps the most interesting and impactful legislative action, the 19th Amendment.
Shortly after the United States was created, protection of rights were created by the government for all white male landowning citizens. African Americans were considered property and were not intelligent enough to be involved in politics. Women also were considered to be property, that is, the property of their husbands. The women were in charge of running the home, taking care of the husbands, and taking care of the children. Among the responsibilities of taking care of the children was their important responsibility of educating them. Men felt as though women should not be allowed to hold office or vote and that they needed to be protected from the evil political world. Shortly after the Declaration of Independence was created, woman challenged its meaning. The Declaration of Independence stated that all men were created equal and provided for their rights to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, but the Founding Fathers neglected to include those rights for women. The movement for women's suffrage began largely because of the anti-slavery protests. Women felt that if the slaves deserved the right to vote, then they also deserved the right to vote since they were far more educated and civilized. The first strenuous efforts to gain equal rights for women began at the Seneca Falls Convention in 1848. At the Seneca Falls Convention, women rights activists Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott led over 300 men and women in a protest against the unfair treatment of women in political, social, and religious aspects of life. The Declaration of Sentiments, which modeled the Declaration of Independence, demanded that women be granted all the same rights and privileges that men had. These rights included the right to vote. Conventions such as the Seneca Falls and national women organizations led to the proposal for the 19th Amendment, which was introduced to Congress in 1878. This amendment remained controversial for 40 years and was not supported by a national political party until Roosevelt's Bull Moose Party. In May of 1919, the Woman Suffrage Amendment was passed in Congress and was sent to the states for ratification. Tennessee was the deciding state, and 24-year-old Harry Burns cast the deciding vote for ratification. 8 days later, the amendment took effect. The 19th Amendment has given way to major growth throughout our country. This amendment was the first stepping stone towards the Equal Rights Amendment, which guaranteed equal rights for women. Many of the great technological and educational advances that our country has experienced would not have occurred if women did not have equal rights. These advances include computers, Scotch Guard, invisible glass, and others. Many women government leaders have also come from gender equality. Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Justice Elena Kagan, and Hillary Clinton are a few examples. Many top businesses are also run by women CEOs, such as Pepsi Company, IBM, DuPont, and Facebook. The 19th Amendment was largely important because it gave half the population the ability to speak up and represent themselves. It gave women the power to cast votes and participate in Congress, and it prevented any citizen of the United States from being denied the right to vote based on their sex or gender. The ratification of the 19th Amendment was also symbolic because it marked a major accomplishment of a difficult struggle that took decades of protests for women to receive their principal rights.
The Plessy v. Ferguson case of 1896 marked a major downfall to the rights of African Americans in the United States. The case began in 1890 when the state of Louisiana passed the Separate Car Act, requiring separate accommodations for blacks and whites on railroads, specifically separate railway cars. A protest against this act by prominent black New Orleans residents, including Homer Plessy, led to controversy on the topic. Plessy refused to move his seat because he was only 1/8 black and 7/8 Caucasian, with his family already certified as whites. Under the Louisiana law, he was required to sit in the colored car, so brought the case to court in protest. It was decided that in order to uphold the constitutionality of state laws, the doctrine of separate but equal would be adopted. Blacks and whites would have separate facilities, but they were technically equal in all aspects, considered fair by Louisiana government. African Americans were immediately demoted to second-class citizens, because American society could not adopt such a policy so quickly. Black and white institutions were required to be equal, but this was clearly not the case. The delegated African American facilities were not kept up at all, and had no improvements whatsoever in comparison to the whites. This court decision enabled the expansion of separate but equal to many aspects of daily life for African Americans in the South, where segregation became an institution. Segregation occurred in many places in the South, including schools, restaurants, theaters, public transportation, and many more. This court ruling was significant in the progression of black equality in America. Although the African Americans seemed to be demoted in society, the term separate but equal was the first time the word equality had even been associated with the African American community, sparking their desire for true equality. This shift in equality was the basis for the beginning of the Civil Rights Movement, African Americans trying to uphold true equality in society. The decision from this court ruling lasted more than 50 years, until the Brown v. Board of Education overruled it. The Brown v. Board of Education court ruling said that segregation in schools was unconstitutional, taking 50 years to make what seems a simple conclusion. The Plessy v. Ferguson case significantly shaped society in the 19th and 20th centuries with its separate but equal doctrine.
I'm going to step off the limb. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
What you just heard are the famous words that Neil Armstrong said as he became the first man ever to step foot on the moon. Apollo 11 was the first manned lunar landing. Astronaut Buzz Aldrin, along with Armstrong, would be the first two men ever to step foot on the moon. This tremendous day, July 21st, 1969, would be remembered forever, not just by the American people, but by the entire world. The mission lasted for a duration of 8 days, 3 hours, and 18 minutes, and it was the fifth manned mission in NASA's Apollo program. The three astronauts, including Collins, who did not go to the moon, were blasted into space in their command module by our Saturn V rocket. The Saturn V remains to today the most powerful, tallest, and heaviest rocket ever put into commission. Landing in the Sea of Tranquility, the astronauts spent 21.5 hours on the moon. During the 2 hours outside the module, Neil and Buzz collected 45.5 pounds of moon rock that would be returned to Earth. Also during this time, they took a series of videos, photos, and planted the American flag on the moon. After their work was complete, the two blasted away from the moon, rejoining Collins, who was located in the command module. On July 24, 1969, the three would splash down into the Pacific in the Columbia. Upon their arrival home, great care was taken in their retrieval. The three would be quarantined out of fear that they had brought back some human-ending alien disease. After many examinations and 3 weeks in quarantine, on August 10, 1969, the astronauts were cleared and deemed healthy. Finally, the astronauts were celebrated for what they and NASA had accomplished. And on July 13th, the astronauts rode in parades in their honor in New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles. Also, there was an official state dinner. In attendance were members of Congress, 44 governors, and ambassadors from 83 nations. It was here that President Nixon honored each astronaut with the Presidential Medal of Freedom. The significance of Apollo 11 lasts to today. Apollo 11 proved that the U.S. was superior to Russia in the space race, and this was essential during the period of the Cold War. The people's mindset was everything during the Cold War, and America landing a man on the moon made the American people feel very good. Also, before President Kennedy's assassination, he promised the nation that he would land a man on the moon by the end of the decade. So the nation owed it to him to fulfill his wish, which they did.
hello there. Why, you keep on surprising me. Well, I'm up here looking for Japanese planes. I heard there's an invasion coming. And now it happened once before, so it may happen again. You never know. Tonight in this segment, we shall be covering the awful tragedy that is December 7th, 1941, in which the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor and started American involvement in the Second World War. December 7th, 1941, a date that will live in infamy. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor in Oahu brought the United States of America into the Second World War, the greatest and deadliest conflict ever in the history of mankind. Hundreds of Japanese fighter planes bombed the United States naval base at Pearl Harbor, destroying battleships and killing thousands of Americans in hopes of crippling an American response to Japanese empire building in the Pacific. The events of that December morning have left a significant mark on the American psyche, and the phrase, "Remember Pearl Harbor," served as a rallying cry for America throughout World War II. At 7:45 a.m. on December 7, 1941, the first wave of the Japanese sneak attack struck Battleship Row along Ford Island. The planes first targeted American airfields, destroying 161 aircraft and damaging another 102. Torpedo bombers targeted the major battleships docked in the cove, crippling the Helena, the Utah, the Raleigh, as well as the USS California, Nevada, Oklahoma, and the West Virginia. In the most morale-reducing moment, the largest battleship, the USS Arizona, was effectively split in two by a Japanese bomber. Fighting resumed throughout the morning, with American forces making a significant anti-aircraft counterattack while two more waves of Japanese aircraft made their attack. In the aftermath of the battle, 18 U.S. ships were either sunk or damaged beyond repair, and 2,896 sailors were casualties. The American Pacific Fleet was severely weakened. Overall, the Japanese sneak attack was a tactical success. However, the direct result of the conflict was a declaration of war between America and Japan, made in Franklin D. Roosevelt's most famous speech declaring Pearl Harbor a day that will live in infamy. Subsequently, Japan's allies, Germany and Italy, the other Axis powers, declared war on America, bringing America fully into the fray of World War II. The consequences were immense. America, Great Britain, and the Soviet Union organized and combined their warfare to defeat the Axis powers. In August of 1945, America dropped 2 atomic bombs on Japan, thus ending the war in a final act of retribution. Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor was a very catalyst for its own defeat.
9/11 marked the deadliest act of terrorism to take place in United States history. There were over 3,000 American casualties, including the lives of countless firefighters and first responders. On the morning of September 11th, 4 commercial airliners were hijacked and taken over by 19 hijackers. They were to be crashed into 4 different targets. These were buildings 1 and 2 of the World Trade Center, also known as the Twin Towers. The other airliners were headed for the Pentagon and the last for the White House. All of the airliners hit their mark, except for the last one. The passengers banded together to overpower the hijackers, and the plane went down in a field in Pennsylvania. There were no survivors. In New York, both buildings hit by planes collapsed. World Trade Center Building 7 also collapsed, but wasn't hit by an airplane. The third plane crashed into the west wing of the Pentagon. This was the single most deadly act of terrorism in history, and gave way to numerous policy changes and got America involved in world affairs once again. The Patriot Act was passed, which was typical of legislation after a major compromise of national security, as it took away some of the privacy of the American people. It legalized government wiretapping and indefinite detainment of immigrants for no reason. This was deemed controversial, but necessary, to augment national security. The 9/11 attacks were used as justification to invade Iraq and Afghanistan, despite both conflicts beginning on false pretenses. Living through 9/11, I remember my parents being absolutely mortified. Never had I seen them so shocked, and just generally rattled. At the time, I was 4 and probably not ready to learn about things of that nature. And for my parents, thinking back now, where could they even begin to tell their child that a city was attacked and 3,000 people just died from terrorists?
It's just unthinkable putting myself in their shoes.
We interrupt this regularly scheduled broadcast to bring you breaking news. Leicester High School history teacher Jason D. Grimshaw, and also the president and founder of the Big D supermarket chain, as well as the planning board director for the town of Leicester, has been caught embezzling money from the town of Leicester, as well as from his own company, the Big D supermarket chain. We turn to Chris Doyle, our field correspondent.
Thanks, Zach. Chris Doyle live on the scene outside of Jason Grimshaw's house, aka Jay Grimshaw. Jay Grimshaw is a longtime Leicester High School student and owner/founder of the Big D Supermarkets, a chain that goes all the way up and down the East Coast. We talked to his family, who were surprised about these embezzlement charges and declined to comment any further. I had Mr. Grimshaw many moons ago, and I could say...
Sorry to interrupt you, Chris, but we have new news that Jason Grimshaw is the subject of a high-speed tank chase on the highway. We've talked to his wife, Linda Grimshaw, who said that he just ran over a telephone pole, and it looks like he's stuck on the tank. We know from his wife, Linda, that he has had some basic military training, and he's taken the tank from a local military base. We're not sure where he's headed. He could be going for a government building or possibly Big D headquarters, and he's going down the Bay Area right now. He's on the dirt, and he's been pulled over, he's been stuck on the barrier. Police are on top of the tank, they're trying to pry open the thing. The operator is still moving the vehicle, the tank is still moving. It looks like he could go off any second. We don't know, the shot may have gone off, the tank has stopped moving. We'll turn to Chris Doyle. Chris, are you there? Do you know, have you heard anything? You're near the scene?
Zach, to answer your question, as far as I know, there are no injuries or deaths. However, there is a string of property damage all around town. At the moment, I cannot say much more, so I think I'm going to sign off. Ow. We return to your normal scheduled program.
Black Tuesday took place on October 29, 1929. During this time, Wall Street witnessed a 13% decline in the Dow. Black Tuesday was the most catastrophic market crash in American history and brought the era of wealth in the 20s to a dramatic end. This day is significant since it had a long-lasting effect on America's economy. Black Tuesday was a catalyst that led to the nation's worst economic crisis, the Great Depression. During the late 1920s, people were continuously spending money that they didn't have due to the availability of credit. Real estate prices were dropping, which caused the stocks to drop as well. Brokers began lending more money than was in circulation in the United States. Bankers met with each other in an attempt to stop the slide of the stock prices. The resolution was to have Richard Whitney purchase large amounts of blue-chip stock, such as U.S. Steel. This halted the panic for that one day, but the stock market continued to fall for several years after Black Tuesday. October 29, 1929 was the worst day in history for the New York Stock Exchange. On this day, the market dropped 11%, which scared investors out of the stock market, leading to 16 million shares being sold that day. The crash on Black Tuesday set the direction of the stock market and the economy for many years to come. Psychologically, this day also caused a decline in America's confidence in the economy, for they believed that the stock market was the economy. This loss of confidence that resulted from Black Tuesday created a run on the banks. People withdrew their savings, and the banks that didn't have enough money on hand due to credit were forced to close, so many Americans lost most of their money. Some people did not understand how bad the stock market crash was until later, since the stock couldn't be recorded on computers. Instead of computers, ticker tapes were used. These tapes, however, could not keep up with the fall of the stock prices. During the Great Depression, unemployment rose to a staggering 25%, wages fell 42%, economic growth fell 50%, and the world trade fell 65%. Prices also continued to drop 10% each year. Black Tuesday had such a significant impact that the stock market did not recover from the lows of 1929 until 1954, 25 years later. This day in history caused the worst economic downfall in American history, which still affects our economy today. Thousands of families were forced out on the streets and struggled to look for jobs as a result of this depression.
Historians and economists today still struggle to find the sole cause of the Great Depression and are still trying to figure out a solution to prevent America from falling back into depression again. The Great Depression called for more security in America, which was what inspired FDR's New Deal and the Social Security Act to protect Americans' money. Some of the acts enforced during the Great Depression still exist today. As John D. Rockefeller spoke about on the Great Depression in 1933, quote, "These are the days when many are discouraged. In the 93 years of my life, depressions have come and gone. Prosperity has always returned and will again." Black Tuesday and its role in starting the Great Depression is still highly recognized today for its impact on economic beliefs and legislation, making October 29, 1929, number 5 on our list of the top 10 days of history.
Oh, hello. I'm practicing if a bomb goes off. You never know what will happen. In this segment, we shall be exploring the most destructive weapon ever used by mankind, the atomic bomb. Dropped on Hiroshima, it destroyed a city and killed thousands, and it started the era that is the Cold War. The nuclear arms buildup is a direct result of this horrible, horrible event.
On August 6, 1945, the United States dropped an atomic bomb on the city of Hiroshima, Japan. This was the first time a nuclear bomb had been used in combat by any country. The United States hoped that the bomb would be successful in convincing Japan to negotiate a treaty ending World War II. 5 years earlier, in 1930, scientists in the United States were working on experiments which began the Manhattan Project. They used research done by Nazi Germany to begin developing an atomic bomb. In July 1945, the first successful test of an atomic bomb took place at the Trinity Test Site in New Mexico. When President Truman learned of the success of the atomic bomb, he was suddenly faced with a very difficult decision. Should the United States attempt to defeat Japan with a traditional land invasion, or use this new destructive device? Truman decided that a land invasion would cost too many American lives and went ahead with the use of the atomic bomb named Little Boy. The use of the atomic bomb would save American lives, but would essentially wipe out an entire Japanese city, killing thousands of people. It is also believed that Truman wanted to use the bomb not only to defeat Japan, but also to show the rest of the world the new unique power the United States had. This would make us seem superior to the Soviet Union amidst the rising tensions that would later lead to the Cold War. As a result of Truman's decision, at 8:15 a.m. on August 6, 1945, in Hiroshima, Japan, Little Boy was dropped by an American plane named Enola Gay. 70,000 people were instantly vaporized, along with all of the buildings and vegetation. As a result of the radiation, some people's shadows were burned permanently into the ground as they were vaporized. Over 100,000 people would later be killed by burns and radiation from the attack. Japan still did not surrender. On August 9, 1945, the United States dropped a second bomb, called Fat Man, this time on the city of Nagasaki. Another 80,000 Japanese people perished. Finally, on August 14, 1945, the Japanese were forced to surrender. Critics of the bombing have said that the decision to drop the bombs was racist and that it would not have been used on white citizens. Others say that Japan was so close to defeat that they would have surrendered without the use of the bomb. Truman argued that his decision had been purely military. Even scientists did not understand the degree of destruction that would occur or realize the radiation sickness and environmental impact the bombing would have for years to come. Regardless of whether or not it was the right choice, the United States is still the only nation to have used a nuclear weapon in combat. The significance of the dropping of the nuclear bomb on Hiroshima was long-lasting and greatly impacted foreign affairs. This is why we agreed that it should be the fourth event in our program. This action started the Cold War and the arms race between the United States and the Soviet Union, which would last for the next 45 years. The bombing also ended World War II, the largest military conflict ever. This event also further weakened relations between Japan and the United States. The dropping of the bomb brought a new technology to the world that is very dangerous, and if used today, could essentially end the world as we know it, making this day in history of great significance.
On April 12, 1861, General Pierre Gustave T. Beauregard, who was in command of the Confederate forces, opened fire on the Union garrison holding Fort Sumter. Only 1 day later, Major Robert Anderson surrendered, rendering a Confederate victory. Although lasting a very short amount of time, This battle provoked the 4-year battle between the North and the South in the Civil War. The battle at Fort Sumter came from disputes on who owned the fort itself. During the 1800s, tensions were on the rise between the North and the South. When the state of South Carolina seceded from the Union in 1860, there was immediate military action set in place. Less than a week later, Anderson and roughly 80 of his men were at the location of Fort Sumter, a fortification in the middle of the Charleston Harbor. Shortly after the inauguration of President Abraham Lincoln, Anderson and his men were running out of supplies, and the Confederate soldiers were starting to get tired of a foreign entity at their port. President Lincoln was put into a dilemma. He did not want to attack the fort since he wanted to preserve the Union and not cause any rifts. An attack from Anderson would show Union aggression and could potentially cause other Southern states, although still part of the Union, to secede as well. Lincoln told Governor Pickens of South Carolina that he was going to send provisions, no arms, troops, or ammunition, and would not attack Southern forces unless they attacked first. Jefferson Davis, the president of the Confederacy, ordered Anderson to surrender since a supply shipment to the fort from the north would only make the Northern forces stronger and have less of a will to leave. Anderson refused to surrender, and at 4:30 a.m. on April 12th, the Confederate forces opened fire on Fort Sumter. Anderson did not fire back until 2 hours later, since the fort was not well equipped for an equal battle. Union Captain Abner Doubleday took the first shot of defense from the fort. The two sides fought all day, with the North firing less bullets than the South in attempts to conserve ammunition. Doubleday wrote, "The crashing of the shot, the bursting of the shells, the falling of the walls, and the roar of the flames made a pandemonium of the fort." The next day, General Anderson surrendered and the Confederacy claimed their victory. Surprisingly, there were no casualties in the battle, with only 80 Union soldiers and around 500 Confederate soldiers fighting. The Union soldiers returned to the North and the Civil War began. The Battle of Fort Sumter was the start of the one and only armed conflict within the United States. If Anderson had originally surrendered before any shots were fired, would there have even been a Civil War? Would the South have the dominating force in the United States? The Battle of Fort Sumter dictated the eventual Northern victory and decimation of the Confederacy.
Hello, ladies. In my hand lies the most important document in American history, the Constitution of the United States of America. It established the three branches of government, the executive, the judicial, and the legislative branch. On September 17th, 1787, the greatest minds ever assembled in the history of our nation worked together and finally ratified the Constitution of the United States of America. That's good stuff.
A document that is crucial to the forming of the United States as a nation, the Constitution of the United States is the representation of the ideals that came to life in the time of the Revolution. It set in stone the ideals of self-government, personal freedom, and individual rights, namely freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of press, freedom of assembly, and freedom of petition, as well as setting in stone the form of government that would be taking place of the former form of government, the Articles of Confederation, all contained in the first 10 amendments of the document, entitled the Bill of Rights. In this Bill of Rights lies the guarantee of a Republican government, laws surrounding the admission of new states, laws concerning crimes and their punishments, and what power the government possesses over the states and their citizens. The Bill of Rights was in part inspired by the English Bill of Rights, written in 1689, bearing similarities such as jury trials and the right to bear arms. The decision for ratification of the Constitution was left entirely up to the states by Congress. Only 9 of the 13 states' votes needed for ratification, unlike the unanimous voting required to enact the Articles of Confederation. Though the drafting of the document began on May 25, 1787, and ratification day was September 17th of the same year, with the final draft of the document being signed by members of the Constitutional Convention, the ratification process concerning the states was spanned over the next 3 years and was officially ratified when Rhode Island ratified it on May 29, 1790. It was, however, put into effect in 1789 after being amended 27 times. Since its ratification, there have been additions, repeals, and edits to amendments over the past 2.5 centuries. Additions including the 18th Amendment prohibiting alcohol throughout the nation, enacted in the 1920s, and the 19th Amendment guaranteeing the women their right to vote. But the basic freedoms have remained unchanged, maintaining all of the freedoms and rights given to citizens during the initial drafting stages.
The Constitution of the United States is an invaluable document, always massively contributing to the path and the nature of the United States as a nation, and will do so until the end of the nation's history.
Fascinating. Just what do you think, Aristotle? I concur. Oh, welcome back. Let me take off my reading glasses first. In my hand is the result of the single most important day in American history. The signing of the Declaration of Independence on July 4th, 1776. The signing of this document marked America's independence from Great Britain and lays the very foundation for our country. It is truly the most significant date in American history.
July 4th, 1776 is an extremely important date in the history of the United States of America. This is the day that the Declaration of Independence, written by Thomas Jefferson, was adopted by the Continental Congress in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. On this date, many of the 13 colonies signed the Declaration. Mentionable signers include Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, Samuel Adams, John Adams, and most famously, John Hancock. The document delineates a precise list of specific grievances in which the American colonists had against the actions of the British government. After disagreements with the British monarchy regarding disputes about rule and argument over taxation without representation, the colonies rebelled and the American Revolution began. Although 2/3 of the population were supportive of the war, groups such as the Loyalists were not. The Declaration of Independence reminded the colonists that they were entitled to certain privileges, and the British monarchy was preventing them. Revealing that Britain was not considerate of the citizens' best interests was a way of leading colonists in the way of supporting America as an independent country and cutting off the bonds they may feel with Britain. The 13 colonies engaged in warfare with the British Empire in hopes of gaining independence from Britain. 422 days after the Revolution commenced, the Declaration of Independence was born. It took so long for the colonies' intentions to be released due to the fact that the Revolution leaders wanted all 13 colonies to agree in unity. The Declaration of Independence is the first major action of unity among the colonies, the start of the now united nation. The adoption of the document gave the immediate feeling of nationalism among all American citizens and gave them the extra strength to fight hard against Britain to win their freedom. Not only did the Declaration of Independence give colonial America hope, its message spread to many nations around the world, giving them the confidence that they, too, can one day reach for the freedom America is proclaiming. Even words of the Declaration of Independence still affect the way America works today. Equality is a main topic discussed within the document. The equality we finally see in America today among men and women of all races stemmed from what was written back in 1776. Truly, today, all men are created equal.
Well, that concludes our segment on the top 10 most important dates in American history. They have shaped our military structure, our economy, and our government. As you can see, these top 10 events are the reason why we are the way we are today. I'm Timothy Peltier. Thank you, good night, and good luck.